The political landscape of South Asia is going through a transformation. Established democracies are facing authoritarian challenges. Transitional democracies are failing to consolidate democracy. And on the other hand, in some countries, democratic aspiration is on the rise. With this backdrop, the time has come. Members of this panel, we have representation in Nepal and Sri Lanka, so I think this is going to be a rich South Asian discussion. I'm going to start with Dr. Mirza, if I may.
I'll go back to the ancient period when the notion of democracy started all over the world. But we don't, in the textbook, we often read about the Greek democracy. But that's just one side of the natural democratic growth, understanding of democracy. But it came out simultaneously in Africa, in India, in China, and varieties of other places. New research has shown that. Okay, so that universal characteristic of that democracy was it's the notion of people's sovereignty. Okay, so the people, they own whatever they have, the territory, the nation, and so on, and they collectively own it, and so democracy started as not what we understand now as representative democracy, meaning someone else represent me in the power. Okay, that wasn't the idea. The idea was that we together collectively hold power, and we exercise whatever we have to do to govern ourselves and so on. So it's more of that, and those methods. Like how do we govern? How do we implement our sovereign power, which is a little bit abstract. So methods came up, and interestingly, the latest method, the most powerful, influential method is the election in direct democracy. That wasn't there at the time. The idea was that you govern yourself directly. So council democracy and so on. Collective democracy, direct democracy, that was the norm. And over history it changed. I cannot get into the history, but eventually the so-called modern form of democracy that started in Europe back in probably 18th century became the indirect form. And there are a lot of power struggle behind it, social characteristics behind it. And that was the first question about democracy. And then what was it?
How are you going to redefine democracy?
Okay, now the thing is that the problem that we are facing throughout the world, not only South Asia, not only Bangladesh, is that this indirect form of democracy, the representative form of democracy, is losing its legitimacy very sharp because of obvious reason that you can see. Okay, that it has failed to give us better form of governance, or as the French eminent French political theorist Pierre Rabelais, pardon me, the first name is Pierre, I forgot the last name. What he called good government. Okay, what we should have now, instead of representative democracy, we should aim for a good government, the entire package. Okay, and to get a good government, representative democracy should be just one component of it. And other components would be going back to the older form of direct democracy in a varieties of forms. And people have been practicing it in Europe, in varieties of, especially in Latin America, in the southern world, where they have started practicing council democracy, citizens' assembly, and obviously referendum, and then deliberative democracy. Which Bangladesh, I don't think we have the experience with that. There are some crazy forms of deliberative democracy, completely dysfunctional because our political elite they don't like it. So, but I think that we need that kind of democracy in Bangladesh, and other people will talk about other places, that a different kind of democratic thinking, different kind of institutional design, so people can govern themselves directly, and there are mechanisms for it. I cannot get into the mechanism. There are design principles for it. Other countries have tried it. We can learn from them. We can customize it, given our own social conditions. But essentially, people will govern people will try to make our our political representatives in the parliament, in the state, and also the bureaucracy, not only from outside, we know with some commissions, constitutional commissions, so on, that's there, but also going inside collectively. They have their collective representation. So the notion that the Latin Americans are increasingly using, instead of representative of the people, they're talking about representative of citizens, they're talking about citizen representative. Citizens represent themselves inside the state and also outside the state. So that's the form of democracy that we need to reimagine. And in a Bangladesh context, we have seen, what our representative can occur. It inevitably gets into morphs into some kind of dictatorship. And this is something I'll end here. This is something which is not specific to Bangladesh. Long ago, the political theorists, including Aristotle and other people, and down to Machiavelli, down to the Italian theorists of anti-oligarchy theorists, they said that, almost like a mathematical precision, a small group of political elites sitting inside the state, they can coordinate well because they're together. If there's a dissent, that person can be bought off immediately. And they will inevitably form an oligarchy. And that was the biggest concern, biggest headache, from Aristotle down to Machiavelli, down to current theorists, the new Machiavelli. Very bright young scholars. They have been talking that what we need, anti-oligarchy oriented democratic innovations, essentially direct democracy, collective democracy. And then the constitution should also be framed so this kind of direct democracy of the citizens collective can be empowered, can have constitutional mandate so they can govern, no one can challenge it, to protect us from inevitable development of oligarchy. And for that, we need to rewrite our constitution, which should be what Machiavelli called long time ago. I'm talking about the philosopher Machiavelli. Plebeian constitution for the underdogs, for the suburb. I'll stop you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mirza. I think you raise a great point, and of course this is a conversation we have been having here in Bangladesh for the last 12 months. To what extent are our existing democratic institutions and our democratic understandings fit for purpose? I think we are having a big national discussion precisely on this issue, and that discussion is not yet over by any manner of means. Of course, it's a real question as to whether we're giving ourselves enough time to having meaningful discussion, whether we're hurrying ourselves to a premature conclusion. But on that note, I would like to bring in Professor Harindra, if I may, from Sri Lanka, to talk a little bit about the Sri Lankan experience of democracy, democratic transition, and how are we defining and redefining democracy, because Sri Lanka has gone through its own democratic transition, slightly predating Bangladesh's by a year, and I think there's much to be learned from that. So if you could take a stand. Thank you.
I'm also trying to, in my 5 minutes or so, try to bring point. Sri Lanka went through this, of course, and Sri Lanka has a way of not following through like over. Now, I'm prematurely messing up with whatever we start. In 1971, 1989, in the same years as Bangladesh was, circumstances still there. Sri Lanka also went through them more or less on the same timeline. But probably it's less chaotic, but our elites are much more stronger in counting whatever that erupts and takes control, has to take back control themselves. So that's what we see even in the last big question. And for it, like if you look at the Sri Lanka, for example, I mean, just to bring this point on, to look at this point on how politics work. I mean, how electoral systems have worked. Since 2010, Sri Lanka has gone through 4 major election cycles, and in 3 out of these 4, people have given a super majority to a political party. And that's very important in Sri Lanka, like that's like with super majority you can do constitution change, otherwise you can't. Now what has happened is, since then, every 3 years people have changed the government. So it's like, now that's an example why it's a broken machine. Because you have a lot of situations that are very short attention spans. In a very short attention span, you try to change governments very quick because you try it's like it's a treadmill of governments. So governments don't have the time, political elites do not have the time. But then there is a entrenched commercial and oligarchs, those who make it work. The system works for them more now because you change the government so fast. Now what do we do now? Now I'd like to elaborate on this point on because when we have we can discuss later when asked in details. So now systems, like people have very short attention, and that's what social media has given us. And it reflects the time, the age. And democracy is not just, as Professor Mesa mentioned, it's not just electoral system. It's one side of it, democracy which is only representative. Then you have to participate in democracy. And then you have representative, deliberative side of democracy, where groups come together and discuss how parliamentary systems, committees work. So these are things that we need to probably think about. But as one thing, because the reforms are still going on, because of the short attention span of people, and they demand so much quick changes. Probably one thing we can do, we think about, is how do we enhance or leverage technology, like increasing plebiscites, increasing gaining political opinion on specific policy. Because social media is now mobilized on to bring about change, but we are not thinking about how to use increase the capacity of technology to consolidate. I'll stop.
Great. Thank you very much. I mean, I think we want to come back to this new technology, how to use social media to actually help advance our goal of making our democracies more. And of course, when we talk about representative democracy, capital R, capital D, that's a system of democracy. But what we're really talking about is we want a democracy which is truly representative, small r. And I think that's the ultimate goal. There are many ways of getting to it. And as Professor Mirza pointed out, that maybe something which is more consultative, something which has elements of direct democracy, referenda. There are many other tools we have in the toolkit to bring this about. With that, I thought I'd bring in Dr. Deepak from Nepal, because Nepal also has a very interesting recent history with democracy, being probably the most recent democracy in South Asia, and what has been the experience since then from your transition from monarchy to the present day. I know it's a lot in 5 to 7 minutes, but please do your best.
Well, greetings from Nepal, which has seen the British model, only because the rest of South Asia, we are not a colony, we didn't have to do that. But because the rest of South Asia, especially India, did it, we had to just imitate that, and it has not gone well. We are seeing a third currently we are seeing the third time failure of this Westminster model constitution. Currently. Why this is happening is because essentially it has degenerated into, democracy has degenerated into form and not substance. We have parties, we have elections, but the corruption within it, political corruption, is astounding. Essentially parties, we had parties before we had a party culture. How should parties behave? How should decision making happen in parties? No, it's not there. What has eventually evolved is we have got the zamindari, a feudal, system, a baron, the head of the party, and I'm sure it's reflected in Bangladesh as well. I'm sure. One head was the baron, zamindar. You may have a couple of henchmen, munims, we call them munims, and the rest are all ranks, serfs. And so that's what we have created parties into. All decisions are left to the party honcho. Party committees have never taken discussion and decision on any issue that matters. It's left to the great leader. So as a result, we are seeing this deterioration of the so-called democracy into something that is the worst form of baronates and new feudal order. I would conclude, I'd just like to repeat, and I think the younger students here might like to read that. It's a wonderful book by a French political philosopher. She died too early, very young, at the middle of the Second World War, Simone Weil. And she's written a wonderful book called On Abolishing Political Parties. Now, she's writing it in the French and German and other context. But I was surprised when reading it to see how much it matches exactly what's happening in Nepal, and I'm sure if we read it, we'll see it matching Bangladesh. It's a very famous book, so you can even download it. The first thing she says is what happens with parties is party welfare becomes priority and public welfare becomes second. Second, the objective becomes to achieve power at all cost. Third, they tend to save one's party member, even if it's a criminal, he or she. Nice to be saved, whatever. Yeah, and right down from the village level, The sideline, within parties, they sideline alternative opinion and views. Yeah. Anybody with alternative view is marginalized very fast. Totally, just out. They twist data and facts to create a narrative that is favorable to the current party doctrine of it. This is Simone Weil saying it, So wait a minute, that's exactly what's happening in the party, okay? And then the other one is it discourages citizen participation, which so like previous audience have said, it just completely discourages citizen participation because the bar has been made so high. You cannot fight as a citizen, you want to get the politics to fight in the election. You can't because the cost is so much. Even for a ward chairman at the village level, they spend crores. What is that? Is that democracy? No. At least to this oligarchy or kleptocracy or whatever you may call it. Okay? And finally, administration becomes highly partisan and eventually corrupt. There you are. Okay. So, we elect representative leaders simply because we think that they represent us because they have some values and they can take independent judgment on any political issue that might arise. Unfortunately, we find out that they're so beholden to the party whip. This whole concept of party whip. It's amazing. In Nepali, we use the word for MPs right now. We call them bhera. Sheep and goat, which whip, the herder with a whip can really put them on line. Now, this is not your representative. How can you have a head as your representative who can be whipped into line to follow the party, this thing. So they lose their independent judgment, which has to come from their belief system, which you subscribe to when voting for the person. Now, when all that is absent, why call it democracy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned earlier, you used the term so-called democracy, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And of course, we might think that here in South Asia, part of that has to do with our societal structure, which is, largely you mentioned baronetcy. But of course, you look around the world, you see that this is not by any means unique to South Asia. And as you pointed out, Simone Weil is, I presume, stretched as a French philosopher, and might have been writing about South Asia, but of course was thinking about Europe, probably foremost in her mind when she wrote what she'd written. I would like to bring in Dr. Nadia, please. We have talked about a little bit about the need for democratic reform and bringing on building on what Dr. Deepak said. If you could talk a little bit about the need for the reformation of political parties, because I think his last few minutes where he talked about how political parties inevitably degenerate. So that is really, I think, a good segue to what I think you're interested in talking about. So over to you.
Thanks. I think, can we quickly step back a little bit? I think let me start from the point where, when you read out the session outline, Zafar, you actually talked about countries that are now aspiring democracies. And I think after 15 years of authoritarian regime, Bangladesh is at that point, we are an aspiring democracy. We want to get back to the path of democracy. And that has been pretty much, we brought that about through the July Revolution, and that has been implemented, or the interim government has tried to implement that through the establishment of democratic governance commissions, 6 commissions that basically was designed to provide reform recommendations that would bring Bangladesh back onto the path of democracy. Those recommendations are out, those reform recommendations are out, and now the Consensus Commission is working to actually consolidate further to get to the point of July Charter. Now, it's interesting because when we talk about transformation in the political space, we're gradually beginning to realize that these state-level democratic reforms, constitutional reform, institutional, legislative reforms, these state-level reforms are not sustainable. It's not enough for Bangladesh or any other country unless and until the connector space, which is the social political sphere, which is the political realm of the reforms are brought in that sphere. Because you have the citizens, you have the political space, which is the main stakeholders in that space are the political parties, and then you have the state. So the connector between citizens and the state are the political parties, right? So the political parties traditionally, or in any society, in any democracy, political parties have an important role. They basically connect citizens' aspiration to policy. That's what they do. But unfortunately in Bangladesh, that has never happened. There has been never a connection between political parties and people per se, and in that connector role, that they take people's aspiration and turn into a policy agenda. In our society, in Bangladesh, political parties have largely worked as corporations, competing with each other and vying for power and vying for essentially, control of state resources. So in that context, when that has never happened, when we at this stage, when we are talking about democratic reform, gradually, that's the transformation in thinking that's coming, that in order to have sustainable state-level reforms, we need to be able to reform the political space, aka we need to get into political party reforms. Now, when we talk about political party reforms, what are we talking about? There are many things. We are talking about, I think, given the dearth of time, I'll talk about 2 key things here. The first and foremost, I think I would talk about is the traditional mode of political party reforms, which we call democratization of political parties. Our political parties are not, they operate in a democracy, but are they democratic in nature? No. There has to be democratization of political parties. And how do we go about doing that? There is a traditional way to do that, which is basically, you have the first way is to basically take the political parties and look at their structures, and there's tried and tested methods which work in democratizing the party, which you make the party structures, you make the committees, you make the pathways to success more democratic, more grassroots oriented. The leadership is chosen from bottom down, bottom up. So there's many ways actually to be able to get to that point where you democratize the political party. These are all tried and tested methods that work, and this is not the hard part. I mean, this is the easy part, quote unquote. The more difficult part in the transformation of the political space is where in Bangladesh, post July 2024, where the parties are finding themselves in terms of the new political reality. What is the new political reality, and how do political parties operate in this space? The new political reality and the new operating space is the advent of social media. So the world and the rest of the political, regimes around the world have been grappling with in the last 15 years, which is how to operate in the time of social media. And that's what you're finding now, that all the political parties, they haven't yet arrived at a point where they know how to operate in this space, because at this point, there are three things that's defining the space now. First and foremost, just the volume of information that's being generated. Gone are days when you actually, I'll take 2 minutes. Gone are days when you actually go to a Shamabesh, and then 2 hours later you see a snippet of it in the TV, and next day you see it in the newspaper. Now everything is in real time. Volume of information being generated, together with it is being generated misinformation and disinformation. How do political parties deal with that? They're not being able to deal with it. They're completely lost. Number two, the most important change that's happening is political narrative. Before, political narratives were created by political parties. Now, anybody can create a political narrative. I don't like it, I'm going to go and create a political and write a narrative. If that gets viral, then that becomes a political narrative. Now, how do you combat that? You combat that by having a very strong narrative yourself. So that, if I tell you that, Trump is actually trying to, give citizenship to 100,000 Latin American people, you're going to be like, no, he's not. Is that the right news? Because they have a very strong political narrative, and you know that what I'm saying does not match with that. So in order to combat that, the political parties then need to have a very strong political narrative themselves, so that all of this surrounding political narratives does not sweep it away. Unfortunately, that's not happening. So the political parties are getting overwhelmed, figuring out that, where is all this coming from? Third and another important aspect is stakeholder versus beneficiary. Before, people were the beneficiaries of politics. Politicking was done by the politicians, by the political parties, by the government, and people were the beneficiaries. Now people are stakeholders. I'm not going to sit and wait for something to trickle down. I'm going to be stakeholder right in the process, because there's a way for me to engage in that process. So unless and until political parties actually get it into their head that political narratives, stakeholder versus beneficiaries, managing real-time information, all of this can be done, it's very hard for them to be able to keep up with these times. So social media strategy, use of technology, being more connected to people, there's a whole bunch of things that political parties actually need to do to democratize themselves or to reform themselves. So that's why, just to wrap it up, there is the traditional reform and democratization process of political parties, the brick and mortar thing, the operational issues, and then there's the new reality that also needs to happen, and both of these needs to happen hand in hand. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you so much. You packed a great deal into that 7 minutes, and you are absolutely spot on time. So much appreciated. And I think what you said resonated probably with the audience about our political parties in Bangladesh traditionally not playing that electoral role. You call them more like corporations in a sense. I think many people say we're being charitable, while other people might use terms like mafia instead. For the traditional political parties, we've seen how they operate here. In the meantime, we've been joined on the panel by, in fact, the one actual politician among all of us. So I'm going to come over to him. It's Barrister Fawaz Abdullah. Are you the General Secretary? The General Secretary of our Bangladesh Party. And I think this is actually the perfect time for you to step in. Could you talk a little bit about political party reform, the challenges faced, and maybe address some of the issues which Nadia had mentioned in terms of democratization of the Republic Party and what your party specifically is doing in this space? Thank you.
So, like to start with, I think Nadia was touching upon the very things. I think one of the brilliant book that I think came out last year or the year before, Professor of the Research, History of the Political Parties. And I think that touched a lot of things. My colleague from the panel, from Nepal, I think, was talking about it. Whether the post-colonial states are still states, these are the bigger questions that we have to address. Whether the post-colonial subjects yet to become citizens. Now, without having a state, can the residents be turned into citizenship? Or there are sufficient number of citizens who can form a state? Now, these are the questions basically hardly discussed among our political colleagues. They are more interested about the constituency, about the upcoming elections, tenders, money to be funneled through, how much I have raised so far, what should be, how to deal with the opponents within the party and the other political parties. These are the topics basically most of the time we encounter among us. And sadly, we don't talk about it. And these are the larger questions, like before addressing the political parties and the irregularities within. I think there are some bigger questions within the society that needs to be addressed. And that's why I call it, like a lot of times, and many of time my political colleagues became quite upset, angry. They feel that I insult them in doing so. One of the things that I recall that we have a 18 years old index, but we call it voters. But at the voters, there is a list by the Election Commission that who are the 18 years old citizens of the residents of this country. It doesn't mean they're citizens. It doesn't mean they're voters.
Right.
Now, the olden times of the Rome, who were able to make opinions? Even under the British colony, last century, who were eligible to vote? The taxpayers, who can pay like 9 paisa, 10 paisa, 11 paisa, 35 paisa, and there is a level of engagement into votes, depending on how much you does it work. It's an European imposition. Now, our tribal society, my colleague was referring to the ships. Now, how that forms, how that transforms into the connections from the center to the periphery. How does it work? The political party, because I happen to be a student member of Labour Party and Lib Dem, and you know there is a issue-based membership you can become in London. So I had that experience, and the kind of a society we lived there, or they had, political party structures matches with it. Now the expectation, the knowledge problem of the political party, what it is, how that was imposed, and the nature of our society simply doesn't match. It's like a huge, like oxymoronic realities after realities, layers after layers that we are confronted with to deal with it. And now we've been given the task, you 6 of us come together, give a solution. Well, we haven't even understood the problem. We haven't even gone dig down into the crisis itself. Now, whether the solution is available, of course. Solution is basically to raise consciousness, political consciousness. We are yet to become a polity. What does it mean to become Bangladeshi? Or Indian or Nepalese for that sense? What does it mean after 47? Why we had a state in 47 and then in 71, and then we have to again fight and fight and fight every decades and uprising and follow through. So without addressing those questions, I think expectations from the political parties and the leaders might frustrate many of us, or even the young generations. I can see that every day. But these are the issues that we have to dig down. Now coming to the very applied issues that we face every day. I'm a lawyer, but because I'm a party secretary, I hardly can attend my chamber or courts. Now, this is a guinea pig example, not just to portray myself as a demagogue, just a guinea pig example. How shall I run my family? Yet, I had a brilliant career in London. I am quite at the peak of my career in Bangladesh as well. Those of us who know me very well, that I have a huge potential to earn money. But I cannot earn money. Now election is down the line in 6 months' time. How shall I fund the election? Are there people who can fund me? I don't see. There is a lot of people very willing to take pictures, appreciate my lectures. Yes, I've heard you, I've seen you on the television, this and that. But is there citizens who can come and say, well, I like your politics and I'm going to be with you. I'm happy to fund your election. No, that's not. Nadia was saying, they are stakeholders, beneficiaries. I know a lot of oligarchs would like to meet me. Even they're happy to pick me up by a private copter to Singapore. I've offered. So now the country, the people wants me to see transparent, honest, politician with highest integrity, but they don't give a damn that how do I run myself on a daily basis. So you want me, you put me in a situation that I live the life of the poor. I live the life of poor in my whole life. Yet at the top of my peak of the career. Yet the society judge me on a transparency basis, whether I'm honest, whether I take grants, whether I do bid, get tenders from the secretariats and kind of things. The society behaving in a very big contradictions, yet the expectation is very high from politicians. So as a state and country, we do not own the idea that this state should support political party, this state and institutions should support electoral process, so the best and brightest can come through the politics. Here, Muzunda is part of the both commissions, and I have been proposing on many occasions. Even yesterday, I had the press conference that why that the state and the election commission doesn't fund the election. I have given the propositions. So you do not fund election, and the commission proposed only 10 taka per votes, 25 lakhs taka. Just imagine the union Parishad member even spends more than that. On the very election day, an MP candidate would be spending close to crore taka. This is the reality. 139 polling centers with a lot of booths. 100 people by every center. You have to feed for the day. 2,000 taka per person. Just imagine. What is the reality? So the money he proposed is absolutely nowhere, because this whole intellectual class doesn't do politics. They're all in the AC rooms, from the AC car to the AC lift to the AC home to the AC office. This is where you live. And they lecture us how to do politics. And now, when the politicians listen to them, just think of them, just bunch of intellectuals, and just give them some jobs, put them some money in them, to do some think tanks, give them some university vice chancellorship. They are going to be quiet. Shut their mouth up.
Yeah.
So this is a reality of contradictions after layers of layers that we need to address. Without the state and election commission funding election, you cannot expect the best and brightest to come to politics. If they come, they will be equally corrupt like their previous generations. So these are the reforms that we have to talk about. I thank the host and panel for allowing me to carry on more than I was entitled to. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know what to say. This type of issues is corresponds the corruption situation when in the election.
When do you think will be the election? Whenever you think the election will be held, that's the day election will be held. In fact, this is the question I frequently face. Will there be an election? So I asked them back, what do you think? Whether do you think there will be an election? So whatever is the answer, I say that is the correct answer. So if you think there will be election, there will be election. If you don't think there will be election, there will not be election, there will not be election.
Okay.
Anyway, so political parties are very important institutions in a political policy. And in fact, let me go back to the title of this session. The title of this session, Transformation in South Asian Politics.
Yes.
And obviously we'll need transformation in politics and political parties. And financing of it. And so political parties, in fact, the questions are raised about political parties. Are the political parties evil? Are the political parties necessary? Or are the political parties really responsible for all the ills that are going on? In fact, if we go back, the American founding fathers, they thought that political parties were evil. And in fact, I have a quotation here from none other than Thomas Jefferson.
I just have about Jefferson thing.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson. If I could not go to heaven, but with the political party, I would not go there at all.
Yes.
And in fact, they thought that it causes factionalism and all the ills that prevails in a society. And in fact, in a anarchic situation, political parties are not taking of this. But the question is, are the political parties needed in our modern day society, in our democratic polity? Political parties perform many functions, from mobilizing people, mobilizing public opinion, and to a lot of other things they do, and promoting ideas and promoting issues and advancing the people's participation, people's involvement. But the political parties, what kind of political parties do we need, given the role that they are supposed to play? In fact, as I was saying, that in a modern, despite the quotation that our friend used on one of the French Simon Nero, many other authorities think that without political parties, you cannot have a democratic system function. And so these are the necessary ills. Political parties are the necessary ills. But then, what kind of political parties, and how do we finance them? In fact, how did the political parties influence our politics? If we look at Bangladesh's situation, and we are talking about transformation, change. And in 1954, there was an election, the Justa Front election. You know who conducted that election? It was the Home Ministry conducted the election. And in that election, all the ruling party, from chief minister to everyone, got defeated. And so that happened there. But it was an acceptable election, and it was a free and fair, credible election. It was held by the Home Ministry. Then what happened? We created institutions, we created legal framework, and did a lot of other things. Institutions such as election commission, legal framework such as RPO, Representation of People Order, and many other laws. What happened? So at that time, we had an election under the Home Ministry, and it was free and fair. But now we have last 3 elections. What happened? And they were stolen election, fraudulent election, whatever you want to call it. And now we not only have institutions and the legal framework, but also we have paharada, we have people watching, such as police, Ansar, and BGB, and even army, and still couldn't deliver free and fair elections. So it's what are the reasons? One of the reasons is degeneration in the political system as well as political parties. In the past, the people used to run for elections for public service, to do good. But now the oligarch took over. The oligarchy that took over the whole country also took over the political party. So we have the business people are now have taken over the political parties. In fact, our parliament is now the extension of the FBCCI, which so we have in Bangla bolte gele রাজনীতির ব্যবসায়ীকরণ হয়েছে, in fact politics has become business. রাজনীতির ব্যবসায়ীকরণ হয়েছে, ব্যবসায়ের রাজনীতিকরণ হয়েছে. And so none of these are going well, unfortunately. The business is not doing well, nor is politics doing well.
So, how to get over it? Will things get better gradually? Gradually, what happened from 54 to today? The gradualism lead to degeneration. So perhaps we need to have an uprising like that we had to really change the system. And in fact, if we cannot change the system, the role of money and lack of or role of money and the role of the oligarch will only cause further degeneration. And that probably led to our July uprising, and some people call it revolution, and perhaps call for a new order. Rather than the old order needs to be dismissed, and perhaps call for a new order, and there we can define political parties, we can define how to finance the political parties, and the role of all the other stakeholders. And maybe that's where we should start, and we are taking a baby step through the consensus commission, not going very far, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the advice. So how about it, Dr. Taiabur? I think we're talking about the role of maybe institutions can play in institutional reform in providing oversight and giving us the superstructure we need for a better political system and ultimately a better polity. If you could perhaps address that in your 7 minutes, that would be great. Thank you. Still have.
Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon to you all. It's very difficult to talk about institutional in 7 minutes. But, so let's start with
Creating insight.
I just want to mention in the very beginning that is this project and so on just to volunteerize the service to take the country close. Just think about the restoration of democracy in 1990s. And after that, we observed a number of election patronage worshipped by people as free and fair. And between this 1990 and 2010, I think this is the time when Bangladesh had made remarkable economic development. And this is the time when the democracy created a kind of motion. That motion has taken Bangladesh to this extent. So we need to create institutions that will help us to hold a free and fair election. So we need to start with that, and without political party, without election commission, without parliament, without parliamentary committees, we cannot do it. Institutions have been defined by Douglas North earlier in his Hawke Institution, Institutional Change and Economic Performance, that institutions are the rules of the game and the implementation of the same. The problem in Bangladesh is that we have very good rules and regulations sometimes, but we don't really care about the implementation has become a big issue. That's why we call it not a very coordination. So Bangladesh Biman has been treated as Bayman because it does not maintain any time, and same thing as happened today. We started our discussion at least 1 hour later, the scheduled time. Then there is another book, Why Nation Fell, written by Rasi Bongdo and Robinson, and they have been awarded Nobel Prize. And so that means you need to create viable institution which can really deliver. And the problem is that implementation has been the most important thing. Even you please try to remember in 1990s the three-party alliance. They made a lot of commitment and they did not keep it. And I think the Consensus Commission has made good achievement already. At least they have tried their best to bring all these political parties together, and they have already made some good achievement. The party that will come to power after this election, hope that they will implement it. If they implement it, I think things will move to the right direction. That is election, and then before that comes the political parties that we have already heard from others. Oh, 2 minutes. Okay, then what can I say? Okay, at least the political parties need to disclose their asset and their financial position, and the political party need internal democratization because we don't see any council meeting at any level. So if you fail to establish democracy within the political party, then how can you expect to establish democratic practices at the state level? So we have a lot of institution, and I think the consensus commission has done some good work, at least by proposing some reform. At least the caretaker government would be brought back. The 70, Article 70s has been will give some freedom to the member of parliament. I think there is more scope for political party financing because if you look at RPO 2013, they have made an amendment that really put the political parties in trouble. For example, that amendment says that you can join a political party and you can run for election. But earlier, there was a provision that you need to be in a political party for at least 3 years and then you can run for election. But that was amended in RPO 2013. I have many things to actually argue here because I have done a lot of work in institution and culture, but I think due to time constraint I cannot go more. The problem is that we live in a society that is patrimonial society, a society which is specified by patron-client relationship, and we are trying to borrow ideas from the Western world. So I think the hard disk, the hard drive and the software don't go together. So we need to really find a local way to match this hardware with the software. So with this, I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay. Could we go with Professor Oliver Rahman, sir?
Thank you, moderator, and my fellow distinguished panelists have already addressed some of the crucial issues that I wanted to discuss. But I think one crucial aspect that we, I think, tend to miss is one that has already been pointed out by Mr. Fuad and also by Sporty Praita, because of course, legally speaking, if you have looked at the PRO Act, it clearly lays out how the funds are supposed to be maintained and distributed or operated by political parties. And it's clearly mentioned that you have to, all funds of a political party shall be maintained and operated through a scheduled bank. Now, I wonder if any political parties that are still operational in Bangladesh, like forget about the previous fascist regime, but any political party, do they really maintain all of their financial correspondence through banks? They don't, and we all know that. So you see, there is a gross violation. So all the political parties that we have already are already violating the PRO Act. Now, what do you do with a situation like that? So we actually stumbled on a very fundamental problem, and something that has already been stressed out, that like we need to kind of find a way to disengage money from politics. But then as Mr. Fuad has already pointed out, how do you survive? How do the politicians survive? Now, of course, we can envision like someone like Pashani living in their village town in Dhaka and surviving with very bare minimum, but we don't really have any politicians like that anymore. And what do you do then? So that's a very fundamental question, and therefore, which also kind of brings us to ask the question: what do we want to achieve through political party formation? That is also a very fundamental question, because if we are talking about, which I think the earlier, the tone that we're trying to set when we started this conversation was about democracy, right? We are trying to have or achieve democracy. What does that really mean? And something which, again, we need to kind of keep rethinking about that. Something which I would borrow from David Graeber, that at the very essence of democracy should mean ordinary people managing their own affairs, as simple as that. So we have some very basic criteria. So you need ordinary people, not necessarily the elites. And you need to have a consensus or a mechanism through which they can manage their own affairs. Now, is that a practice that we see in our political parties? Absolutely not. And therefore, which is quite a stark reminder, because we cannot disengage money from politics. We cannot, in this current statist and capitalist framework, it is an absolute impossibility. And therefore, the question that you're asking, will they I would ask, can they? They can't, and we all know that. And therefore, again, a stark reminder, because the new political party which has just been formed, right, National Citizens Party, which used to be National Citizens Committee, and they had to go for a political party because what did they want to achieve? They couldn't achieve through uprising, which were, we all had participated in that. But they know the impossibility of achieving what they want to achieve without having to form any of those formations, which we know as coalition, and something which Mushtaq Khan has also pointed out as kind of a declined patron relationship that we see in political parties. How do we have to come to the point where this clientical relationship has been achieved? Why do we have this client and patron relationship, and where is patronage? Something which I think Vice President has already pointed out. There are businessmen ready to offer them a copper to bring them to Singapore. So if they are the stakeholders, if they are the primary captors of the state, why would they want to get rid of that? And if the political parties or if these political organizations are coalition and or forming coalitions with them, why would they want to lose that? So that is a very fundamental question and a very fundamental issue that we actually face. Then what do we do as ordinary citizens? And of course, I think we can talk about society, people not being able to, like a post-colonial subject, not being able to transform into citizens, but that is also a very fraught understanding, because I think the aspiration of post-colonial subjects to turn into citizens have already been articulated through the July uprising, and not just with July uprising, even way before that. We have several uprisings like that. So people actually have articulated their citizenships, but there is this kind of a brokerage system which is preventing from materializing that articulation. So that is something that I think we need to address, and of course that will require some other changes, which of course is how do we kind of do democracy in a modern state situation where we have basically border regimes which are not even, I guess, in a sense, a state. And how do we manage the kind of qualitative resources? How do we redistribute them? So those are fundamental questions. If we do not address them, we can't have a commission which will somehow magically, become a messianic style, will appear like a Mahdi and will sort of magically remove all the problems that we are facing. So I think my time is up. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, moderators. Thank you, organizer, for inviting me. I sometimes think, I want to go back to my university life, and I sometimes regret that's why didn't I join to the traditionally student politics. You perhaps know why, right? Because in our time we had an approach towards the student politics. At least to some students, that student politics is not good. Good students do not go to the politics. So from that traditional perspective, you can see others are taking this leverage and taking the leadership to the politics, and they became the top leaders at some point of time. So what I'm trying to refrain in that place, that at present time in our political context, we do not have much of political education within their direct politicians, like young politicians. Like they learn politics, learning by doing through that process. So that may some sort of problem, like sometimes we see politics as the traditional forms of income generating activities, but you can see teaching. I'm a teacher, I teach at a university. I know my limitations, I know how much I can earn. But a politician, they also need to accept that fact, like my colleague mentioned about some of the veteran politicians who had a different lifestyle. But we take it as a granted that when you're a politician, you have certain amount of income generating activities that be there. It's kind of a business, our colleagues mentioned. Like we know that many academics, and they theorized it as expected political system, how they created oligarchs and how every social institutions have become politicized. If you look into the university to any organizations, everything is very politicized, right? So that sort of thing we need to address at some point of time. And a few things that I'd like to mention. One thing is there's a huge problem of getting into one common consensus. I know that our consensus committee is doing their everything that they could do, but still we cannot find in many cases like common ground to come with the betterment of the country. What I can say, one thing in that context, that in most cases we do not think about like the end part of it, like the development. Like political parties can bring the development of a country, and that can really bring the or upscale the livelihood of the mass people in our country. But in most of the cases, you can see who are the beneficiaries of the so-called development, whatever we achieved so far, and what are we going to achieve. Like us, the people like middle class, upper middle class, they're the beneficiary. But who are the struggling community in our country? They do not see much benefit of the development. So if we do not have institutional development and system through the reform process, then probably it will be very difficult to achieve in coming days. And when it comes about, I'll just touch one point and then I'll come back. The reform initiative that we're having, like in the beginning of, like right after the July uprising, we had a huge expectation to these interim government and the new leadership. But gradually we see that became faded away. Like now, I do not expect too much. Probably expecting too much was the bad thing at the beginning, because we need to understand the limitations that we have. We cannot do all the reforms at one go. If we look into the countries, examples of the countries who did greater revolutions, although we have a debate about whether it's revolution or student uprising, but if you look into China, if we look in the other capitalist country, how did they really change everything? Reform is an ongoing process. We need to accept that. Like we cannot do, like one government cannot do all the reforms. So we need to go phase by phase, prioritize way. Like elections is coming up maybe in a few months' time. Then if we want to do a free, fair election, what are the minimum reforms that we need? Can we focus on that? Another thing that we sometimes forget, that feasibility of implementation of agenda. Sometimes we do not see the feasibility or practicality. We forget about that. Like when we are sitting, our politician colleague mentioned that sitting in the AC room and bringing about different policy much maybe easy, but implementation is very difficult, right? So we also need to think about what are the issues that we can implement. What are we capable of implementing that? And last point, that all the time we are adopting the Western model. Can we think about something homegrown, blended, or coming from our South Asian context or Bangladeshi context that would sustain and stay long in our country context? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bulbul. We are running out of